A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
You know, just a glance at the headlines shows there are huge shifts and political realignments that are going on all around the world. These changes are affecting everyone, including Christians, whose safety and security often depends on who holds power. So how should Christians react and position themselves in the midst of all these changes? Well, there are snap elections looming in the UK and in France, and later this year a US election that looks like being another Biden-Trump showdown. Our next federal election is due early next year, but with elections in the Northern Territory and the ACT and in the state of Queensland before then. Leaders are asking people, what sort of country do you want? Both sides of the political spectrum accuse the other of extremism, either being far right or radical left. So what does political upheaval mean for the Christian? Well, we're back with one of our favourite commentators today, author, Bible teacher and futurist, Dr. Kameel Majdali, who leads Teach All Nations. And he's joining us from the UK. Hey, Kameel, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Good morning, Australia.
And it is good morning to you too, but a different time of the morning. I think it's, about 2 o'clock in the morning where you are in the UK?
Yes, 1:37 to be exact.
Kameel, thank you so much for staying up late to share your insights. Let me start with just the overall fact that with all of these elections coming, and some of them, they weren't due now. Some of these are snap elections, but because there is a changing political environment in so many nations around the world, I wonder if you've got a thought or two on a changing world that we're living in.
I don't even know where to begin, Neil. There's so much going on. But we're in a time of not just change. I would say we're in a time of shaking. I've been saying this for a while, based on Haggai 2:6 and Hebrews 12:25 to 29. There talks about in the last days, one more time God will shake not just the earth, but also the heavens. Now, obviously, we're not having the heavens shake, at least not at this point. But there is ample scriptural evidence prophetically that the world order will go through a great shaking before the coming of Messiah, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And we're seeing it everywhere. You have to be comatose not to miss it. And all of this creates uncertainty, insecurity, foreboding, but also it creates a lot of restlessness and strife because people see what's going on and they don't like it, and there is pushback. That's one thing about a democratic system. There's the checks and balances, and the people or the will of the populace also has to be measured into that equation. So we're seeing a bit of that now across Europe, in the UK, and we're seeing it also in the United States. At this point, I would think less so in Australia, but Australia wouldn't be far behind either.
Australia does seem a little further behind, and yet we're seeing some of the same sort of polarisation, this left and right divide, both sides of the political spectrum accusing the other of extremism. If you're a conservative, you're considered far right, or if you're on the progressive side, you're considered radical left. And, there's people don't often talk centrist as much as they do as make the accusation that you're somehow extreme. Is this anything, do you think, that's, is significant?
Well, what, the name calling? The extremism?
Well, there may be name calling, but there may also be a further move for those who are on the left to a more radical leftist position, those who might be on the right to a more far right position. There's name calling, but there's also the polarisation and the positioning that we have politically according to ideological foundations.
Well, look, what I can tell is this. that there are mainstream values, which we would dub also Judeo-Christian values. And over the years, Judeo-Christian values have been pushed, shall we say, or the non-mainstream values, maybe I'll put it that way, are shifting to the left, so that if you hold mainstream values, all of a sudden you find yourself on the periphery rather than in the center. And yes, they would call you far right, even though far right, really, it's just people who believe in national boundaries, national customs, national history and heritage, and again, traditional values. What's so far right about that? Far right, of course, they want to equate with extremism, but I don't know if the label will stick, and I think if more people will stand up for what they believe, we will get some balance in the meantime.
What are your thoughts on the fact that if you don't make Christ Lord, if you don't acknowledge that there is a God who is the foundation of all truth, that somehow or other you have to put your faith in what you might even call political saviours, your faith in the fact that you think that your governing authorities are going to get things right and do things that are going to be good for a society. Any thoughts here?
Well, if we don't have Christ as the center of our life, if we're not led by the Holy Spirit and by the precepts of God's Word, if we don't have what Paul describes in Romans 12:2 as a renewed mind, then we are going to think, speak, and act like the prevailing culture, even if we are church attendees. And that renewed mind is so crucial, not only for understanding things correctly and from God's point of view, but from also keeping us from acting like the world and taking on the baggage of the world and, God forbid, the condemnation of the world. So our thinking has to be guided by these wonderful principles of the Word and of the Spirit, because the Sadducees got it wrong because they did not know the Scriptures nor the power of God. I'm seeing a great concern in this as a Bible teacher. I'm quite passionate about the fact that people need to know the Word, or their chances of getting it wrong are 100%.
Let's talk uncertainty, because with all of the upheavals that are going on around the world, of course, we can certainly point to that and say there is uncertainty. There's uncertainty too here in Australia. But what does that mean, do you think, for the Christian navigating uncertain times?
Well, if the Christian is walking with the Lord then and obeying His word, Jesus says they're a wise man, wise woman. They're building their house on the rock. They should not worry about the uncertainty. They should be aware of it. They should be prayerful about it. They should draw insight from God regarding it. But to worry and fret, no, that is not God's will. Take this from somebody who's an organic worry ward, and I've learned to conquer it in Christ and take hold of the peace of God that passes understanding. But at the same time, even when you're on the rock, you can still see what's going on roundabout, and there can be storms. The storms are temporary, but from a human point of view, they can be seemingly long-lasting and endless. They're not, but nevertheless, they're here, and it should tell us that there is a great battle being waged, but not on earth as much as it is in heaven. I like what one pastor from Seattle put it. The culture war is the proxy war of the great spiritual battle happening in the heavens. And to me, that really says it very well. We're in intense spiritual activity heaven-wise because of the power shift we expect to see in the future from the kingdoms of this world to the kingdom of Christ. So, of course, it's going to be reflected on earth. And I believe some of the uncertainty and turmoil we see is a result of that spiritual heavenly force. But I might quickly add, only the church is equipped to face, fight, and win this battle with the spiritual weaponry that God has bestowed us through Christ.
When we think of that uncertainty, Kameel, in the context of there being a spiritual battle, now this is only the realm of the Judeo-Christian view, that there's a bigger battle going on than just the battle of values that happens in politics. There is a sense here in which if you are a very secularized Christian, you might want to even just think about the politics without the spiritual battle. But what about the Christian? Can you put your head in the sand here? Or ought you be looking to engage what that spiritual battle looks like to be able to define what's happening as the battle between ideologies goes on?
I would say it would be the most unwise thing in the world, Neil, to put our head in the sand on this and put our head in the sand on anything. One of the great essential skills of last days living is what Jesus said repeatedly, and that is to watch and to pray. Just read Mark 13, and I think it's verses 33, 35, and 37. He tells us to watch. Head in the sand means our eyes are closed. To watch means our eyes are open, our ears are open, and not only to hear what is going on around about us, but more importantly, to hear what the Holy Spirit is saying, because He will give you a download of direction, consolation, comfort, but an imperative to go forward and take on this fight. After all, the Christian life is a fight. It's a good fight of faith. So we can't sit this out. This is not something you can be a spectator to, because you have taken territory from the devil just by coming to Christ. And therefore, you're in this battle whether you like it or not. But the good news is we not only have effective weaponry, we have the promise of God's presence in the midst of the battle. He told Joshua to be strong and courageous and go and take the land. But he also went on to say, the Lord, that is, the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So if God is with you and for you, nothing and no one can be against you.
There's so much going on, Kameel, but perhaps best to start with a major shift that's going on in Europe. How are you seeing things?
Well, it's interesting. As certain places veer to the left, Europe, which always seemed to be left orientated, is actually moving now towards the right. This movement towards the right is not absolutely new. It's been going on for the last few decades, probably since the 1990s. So in the time of the 90s, when America was under Bill Clinton, a Democrat, Europe was starting to drift towards the right after probably decades of leftward governance in that continent. As you're about to discuss with me, the European Union parliamentary elections, which just happened, was a massive shift to the right. And when we say right, we don't mean fascism. We mean national populism versus globalism of the left. And so national populism has made great inroads in Europe with the elections that have just passed. And it's something that is causing a power shift.
So when we talk about globalism, bring into that the immigration issues, because as I've heard it discussed, the two I's in Europe, immigration and Islamization, and they're a part of a global plan, doing away with borders and having people moving into other nations and settling. What are your thoughts here on immigration and Islamization? Is that a fair thing to be able to reflect on as what's causing part of this shift from left to right?
I would say those two issues are the major part of the shift, which has been happening for years. Now, there's one thing of having immigration which includes Muslim people. There's another thing when it talks about Islamization, actually making the country more Islamic friendly at the expense of the prevailing Judeo-Christian culture. So, I mean, for example, they've had immigrants to Germany from Muslim background in the 1950s. from Turkey, whether they're actual ethnic Turks or Kurds, it doesn't matter. And that's been going on for years. Nothing bad to report per se, but the new thrust of immigration is unfettered immigration, unvetted immigration, particularly as is happening in the United States at the moment. And it is getting people's dander up, as they say, because it's coming at a big cost, and it's a cost they're not willing to pay. One of it is how they govern themselves. Another is about the prevailing culture, history, and heritage. All this is being challenged and even threatened by what we see. And then, of course, remember, there are those pro-Hamas protests that have been going on all over the Western world, very well synchronized and very well organized, I might add. And that is bringing issues to a head, too, because it's very, shall we say, dominating, very shrill, and it's causing a conflict in society that's becoming more and more apparent. People don't like it, and they want some action as well as some answers.
Security
to what
and
we're facing.
Security and safety are primary and no doubt in the forefront of thinking with a lot of people right throughout Europe. It's led to what's been announced as a snap French election. How does that fit in, do you think, with the shift in the European parliamentary elections?
Well, it's not just a snap election in France, because Macron, he's so upset by these elections that have just happened, and his chief rival, Marine Le Pen, made great strides. I think maybe a third of the vote went to her party, which they've always tried to label derisively far right. She made such great strides that he decided, I'm taking the people to parliament. And what's funny about these elections, they're just within a few weeks' time. And a short time later is the Paris Olympics. Now, to have snap elections before your country hosts the Olympics is pretty strong action. But it does, how should we say, illustrate the disease that people like Macron, who's considered a globalist rather than a nationalist, are feeling at the moment, because that's the European Union. In a microcosm, European Union is very much for a greater global union at the expense of national sovereignty, borders, identity, history, heritage, and culture. So, but an even more interesting thing happened, but it's not well discussed. The Belgian Prime Minister, who, like Macron, is more globally orientated, he resigned as a result of these EU, not just snap election, but snap resignation. Macron doesn't want to resign, but who knows? He may feel he has no choice if things don't go his way in this upcoming snap French parliamentary election.
And of course, Macron is on the left and the right is making a comeback in Europe. But the UK, is that a different story? You're in the UK, you've got a very close eye on what's going on, developing for a UK election, but the Conservatives are looking like losing power. What's happening in the UK?
Well, I don't know if it's a shift to the left, as much as it is a revulsion at the Tory party. The party of Thatcher and Churchill we're talking about is about to get not only a beating electorally, it almost faces a wipeout altogether. And the reason, this is what I'm told, okay, and that is the Tories are no longer conservative. They're more social democratic. There's hardly any, shall we say, difference between policies of the Conservative Party or Tories in Britain and the, how should we say, front-running Labour Party, which is poised to take office. Now, the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer is trying to project a Tony Blair, moderate, third way kind of thing, the best of both worlds, of the left and the right. I'm dubious whether that's what they're going to actually do, but I have to say, this election campaign in the UK is very bizarre. It's no passion. People are not interested. They're disgusted with both major parties. No enthusiasm whatsoever for the leaders of the two parties, Rishi Sunak of the Conservative Party, who is currently the Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer, the opposition leader, who's poised to become Prime Minister. The biggest excitement is the third party that's in this race, the Reform Party, led by Nigel Farage. If he's not familiar to our Aussie listeners, Nigel Farage is the reason Britain did Brexit the last few years ago. He is actually Mr. Brexit. He's never been in Parliament, not for lack of trying, but has almost single-handedly brought the issue of European Union membership of Britain. And he managed to get it in the polls, and he managed to get the vote for Brexit in 2016. So he is a very influential man for somebody that's never held a parliamentary seat in Britain, although he was a member of the European Union Parliament representing Britain when Britain was there in the EU. Nigel Farage's party, how should I say it, is now polling stronger than the Conservative Party. So when you get a third party polling more strongly than the main party in power at the moment, that's the biggest news of this whole election campaign thus far. And the rise of the Reform Party is very recent. Very recent. They were like nothing before this election campaign. Now they're getting on the map.
Kameel, you're just back from a teaching tour through Germany and the Czech Republic. Were you picking up any sort of special vibes from the Germans or from the Czechs on your travels around what's going on with all of the changes and upheavals politically in Europe?
Well, Neil, there seems to be a perception that in Europe they're much more situationally aware of what's happening in the world than, say, other parts like America and Australia. And that experience, I spoke on current events, particularly the Middle East war, and if it has anything to do with Bible prophecy. And even on short notice, very short notice, 24 hours notice and a WhatsApp appeal, we had people coming, driving at least an hour or more to hear what's happening, going on in our world. And the Czech Republic was the same. In fact, I did a Understanding the Times style tour in the Czech Republic. Very, very interested. I went to an international church in Prague, and I was amazed the nations that were represented in that congregation from all over the world, wanting to hear what's happening all over the world. And that's a good thing. It's the time of staying within the four walls of your home or your church. Those times are finished. The world events are coming, how should you say, crashing on our doorstep like powerful waves. And we need to learn to ride those waves rather than be inundated by them.
Hey, you are planning another visit to Australia, and so many listeners will be very familiar with the Understanding the Times tours of the past 8 or more years. You're planning a little bit more of a scaled-down visit later this year. What's your plan for coming to Australia?
Well, when I did Understanding the Times in the form we all remember, it was a national tour, coast to coast, lasting for weeks. I think in 2018 it was 10 weeks. It was, and 63 meetings or so in that 10 weeks. I don't have that kind of time this year. I only have a little over a month. So that will be primarily in Victoria in October. As much as I want to go to WA, as much as I want to go to Queensland and so on, I can't do it this year. So it's Victoria, October, and we have all the information on our website. So we look forward to seeing people in those in the Victorian tour, which is where I'm from. So of course it's familiar territory, it's home territory, Melbourne, Victoria. So yeah, on our website we'll have all the information, and we'll still be talking to Vision throughout the tour, as I have done in previous tours, as we value the partnership with Vision very much.
Okay, taking calls, 1800 316 316. Let's go through as quickly as we can on some of these calls. Let's hear from Chris in Melbourne. Hey, Chris, welcome along.
Good day, Neil. Good day, Kameel. Yeah, is the main reason why Europe is heading towards the right and the rest of the world as well, not just because of the climate change ideology or gender ideology, but the Islam ideology, that's sort of pushing people to the right, especially like in France, and now with the Free Palestine movement in America and in Australia, and seeing how radical they are, is that's what pushing people over the edge.
Kameel, thoughts here for Chris?
Well, Chris, thank you for that question. And I would say all the above you've just mentioned are factors in pushing people to the right. And I can't add any more than that. The left has been very aggressive in its agenda, whatever it is, not just the climate ideology, the immigration, the digital currency, and even, most ominously, fiddling with our food supply, closing down farms to reach some nebulous climate goals. I mean, the world population isn't shrinking, it's growing. The last thing we need to do is reduce farmland. But of course, this is all part of a plan, and people are recognizing it. That's why you had amazing, eye-catching farmer protests across Europe where they stopped traffic in major places with their tractors because they said, we've had enough. And in fact, the farmers in the Netherlands, which is the second largest food producing place on earth after the United States, having farms closed there, they had such massive protests, they started a political party and became a formidable force in the Dutch parliament. Very new to politics, but all of a sudden the circumstances that were being forced on them gave them no choice but political activism and running for office and winning those seats, similar to the Reform Party here in the United Kingdom.
Chris, thank you so much for your call. 1800 316 316. Let's take another call. Vince is in Brisbane, Queensland. Hey, Vince, welcome.
Hi, Neil. How are you? Yeah,
very well.
Good. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, look, one thing often has bugged me with our dubious mainstream media is, say, for example, I decided not to take those dangerous COVID jabs, and in their eyes, I would have been labelled a far-right extremist, even a Nazi. But the thing is, Benito Mussolini himself said fascism is the merger of big government and corporation. And when you looked at how our corrupt media were pushing these dangerous, pushing these dangerous jabs, and so was the government. Well, to me, that was the pure embodiment of fascism. So, for me, I saw a distinct example, really, of outright hypocrisy.
Okay, yeah. Vince, let's get a thought or two from Kameel. Kameel, around the whole COVID jabs, is that still something relevant in European shifts from left to right?
I think the COVID jabs caused a lot of controversy worldwide, not just in Australia, although Australia was getting a reputation worldwide for not only the mandates of the jab, but for the lockdowns, which were just... It caught even lockdown advocates in other parts of the world off guard simply by the length and severity of the lockdown. So there's a common notion that the left wants, and that is to say that fascism is from the right. Just remember, the Nazi Party was called National Socialism. There's nothing right-wing about National Socialism. There's a difference in emphasis about nationalism combined with the socialism, but it's still the same kind of ideology. And the creator, the advocate of fascism, Giovanni Gentile from Italy, he was definitely a socialist. He is the founder of fascism, like Marx is the founder of Marxism. And it was as left-wing as you can get. So it's a myth to say it's right-wing, fascism that is. It is very much a product of the left with a slight change of emphasis in between himself and Marxism.
Thank you so much, Vince, for your call. 1-800-316-316. Let's take another call. Graham in Tasmania. Hey, Graham.
Good morning, gentlemen. The world is a great change now, and Matthew 24 is crying out to the world, a falling away, a cooling off from God. And 2 Thessalonians, Paul talks about a man of sin. And we see a pressure in Israel now and with the Muslims, a big pressure. And the world's changing, rejecting God. We're seeing that time closing in on us today and confusion in our governments. I'll leave it at that.
Graham, good thought. Kameel, thoughts here for Graham around biblical prophecy and things that are going on today?
Well, it's a big topic, and I appreciate his emphasis on the scripture and prophecy. But always remember there's more to the picture than that. And that is the last days, as I often say, is a time of contrast, not just doom and gloom, but the light will actually be getting brighter as the dark gets darker. And in a time of falling away, apostasy, which was prophesied, there'll be the greatest revivals we've ever seen. So let's keep our eyes on the whole picture, and that is, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, gross darkness the people, but the Lord shall rise on thee, and his glory be seen on you. So let's seek God for revival and reformation, because that is, the hour is now.
In a time of doom and gloom, might be a time to look for opportunity. Graham, thank you so much for your call. Let's squeeze in another one. Andrew is on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Hey, Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Look, I just think you love Vision Radio. I think you're doing a fantastic job, but I just get so frustrated that you're a voice in the wilderness. There just doesn't seem to be any conservative media, mainstream media, that presents contrary views to this. We seem to have to wait until it all blows up and it goes beyond the pale. And politicians are sort of bound by what they think the current zeitgeist is. So I sort of feel sorry for them. If they stand up and be counted, they're cut down. But things like the previous program where you talked about this bill before the New South Wales Parliament, I mean, I'm sure the average person would just be horrified, but...
And this is the issue, isn't it? Ignorance. And if there's ignorance in the corridors of power, if the politicians who are voting on such bills are ignorant of what the bill actually means and what sort of outcomes it will bring, that's a challenge. But then, yes, you're right, when media is not reflecting any of these thoughts, how are the general public expected to know? That's something, I guess, which makes a program like this and Vision Radio being broadcasting around the nation makes it all the more important. But Kameel, a thought or two for Andrew?
Well, I understand the frustration, Andrew. It depends where you're at. If you were in Europe, there's no conservative media mainstream at all. In the United Kingdom, it's a little different. They do have some media outlets, in this case newspapers, which would have more of a tilt to the right. America has that too, although the mainstream media is solidly in the left-hand column. But in Australia, there are conservative voices. We just need to know where to look for them. And when they say something worth hearing, point that out, press the like button, press the share, send it to your friends. Because what's happening is, because of the lack of proper journalism in media quarters, people are turning to alternative media, even if it's podcasts and things on the internet. And these are good sources, very credible, very common sense, and they're pointing the way forward, which gives us great hope. So you have to shop around a little bit to find those voices, but they are out there.
Andrew, thank you so much for your call. And let's put a line under calls for now, under a little bit of time pressure here this morning, Kameel. I don't want to miss talking about the US election, and of course we'd need an awful lot of time to tackle a whole lot of issues. But when I said it looks like it's headed for a Biden-Trump showdown, What are your thoughts here? Because there's a lot of people who are saying, how can the Democrats go to an election with Joe Biden as the leader, just simply because of some of those vulnerabilities that come with older age? Any thoughts here from you as to what might be ahead in the US election?
Neil, in one sense, in the natural, everything is up for grabs. This is a very bizarre election cycle in the United States, where you have two candidates rematching, which we haven't seen that in probably 60 years, where they had Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower in the 50s kind of thing. Actually, 70 years. But in addition, there's an unpredictability and a volatility. Biden is increasingly showing disturbing signs of dementia, wandering off at the G7 summit, and many garbled statements from the microphone. And it's horrible. It's almost like elder abuse. They keep him propped up like that. And then you have Mr. Trump, who has felony charges imposed on him, and he's going to be sentenced on the 11th of July. So this is the most unusual election, I believe, in U.S. history, where the two main contenders are not guaranteed anything, not even guaranteed to make it through the summer without some kind of holdup of their circumstance. So Joe Biden could be replaced, Mr. Trump could be jailed. God knows. But what I do know is we're to watch and pray anyway, because how America goes, so does the rest of the world, and that includes Australia.
Let me ask you about any contrasts that you might be able to draw. The way people are thinking about elections in Europe, France, the UK, the US, and perhaps the way Aussies typically respond so far as our passion for the political processes. Any thoughts here on contrasts? Well, the contrast I'm noting is the one between the US and the UK, where the UK election, the main contenders do not arouse any enthusiasm. In the United States, it's a different story, especially with Donald Trump. When he was convicted by a Manhattan jury that voted 90-some% for Biden, his poll numbers went up, his fundraising went through the roof. I think it was at least $200 million after conviction. I mean, who's ever seen anything like it? $200 million after you've been convicted and you're a felon now. So, and rallies that are packed to the rafters. So it's, what do we make of it all? I think it's too early to tell. But as I said, there's no lack of passion on the American side of the pond, unlike that in the United Kingdom. Kameel, we have to close out our conversation, and for listeners, and you're thinking, what about the Christians in the midst of all of this? Our opening segment in our conversation today was very much about where Christians stand while all of these upheavals are taking place around the world, and how we might think about a context for where our Christian thinking on the shaping values for a nation might actually be in that political process. And we mentioned that Dr. Kameel Majdali is coming back to Australia, a shortened tour, not like his previous years, but it's going to be a Victorian tour during the month of October. And as I understand it, Kameel, there is room for one or two more dates if there are particular communities that like to have you come and present an Understanding the Times tour style presentation. So Dr. Kameel Majdali, Teach All Nations. Here's the website to connect with Kameel and subscribe to his newsletter, tan.org.au. Teach All Nations, tan.org.au.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.